Zainab ripped open the brown package with excitement. Inside, a small white box rested between layers of protective wrapping. The DNA test kit. It was just a trend, something people on social media did for fun. She had ordered it without much thought, eager to see what secrets her ancestry held. Across the room, Aisha watched her with amusement. Arms folded, a smirk on her lips, she shook her head. People were always looking for answers they were not ready to find. What if it tells you that you are actually from Ghana? She teased, leaning forward. Zainab laughed, waving off the comment. Relax, it's just for fun. She pulled out the instructions, carefully reading through each step. It seemed simple enough: swab, seal, and send. A moment later, she took the cotton swab and ran it inside her cheek, making sure to follow the directions exactly as written. Aisha sighed, shaking her head. People go looking for trouble, then cry when they find it. Zainab grinned as she sealed the sample and placed it inside the return envelope. You worry too much, she said, dropping it into her bag. It's just a test. Nothing life-changing. Neither of them knew how wrong she was. Days passed. Then weeks. The test had become an afterthought, buried under work and daily routines. Then, on an ordinary afternoon, while scrolling through emails, a notification popped up on her phone. Your DNA results are ready. Her heart skipped a beat. Clicking on the link, she waited as the page loaded. A percentage breakdown appeared first. Yoruba. Fulani. A mix of West African heritage, just as expected. Then, something else. A section she hadn't anticipated. Immediate relative match, biological father found. Her eyes locked onto the words, confusion washing over her. This had to be a mistake. Then, she saw the name. Alhaji Suleiman Bello. She froze. The name was unfamiliar. It was not the man who raised her. It was not the man she had called Baba all her life. Her hands trembled as she stared at the screen, reading the words over and over. From across the room, Aisha noticed the sudden shift in her expression. The color had drained from her face. What's wrong? She asked. Zainab barely found her voice. It came out as a whisper. This is not my father. The room felt smaller. The air, heavier. The truth had been hidden all her life. But now, it had come looking for her. And it would change everything. Zainab had grown up in a world of wealth and privilege. The Hassan family was respected, powerful, and untouchable. Their grand mansion in Lagos was a symbol of status, a fortress where everything appeared perfect. Chief Hassan was a man of power. A businessman whose name carried weight in political and financial circles. His wealth built the life Zainab had always known. Madame Hassan, his wife, was a woman of elegance and control. A socialite who commanded respect, ensuring that their family image remained untarnished. For years, Zainab admired their marriage, their love, their unity. But now, doubt crept in. If everything had been perfect, then why was another man's name listed as her father? Her hands trembled as she turned to her laptop, heart pounding. The name from the DNA results echoed in her mind. Alhaji Suleiman Bello. Who was he? Fingers shaking, she typed his name into the search bar. The screen lit up with articles, interviews, and headlines. Alhaji Suleiman Bello, a powerful politician in northern Nigeria. The man behind the influence, a look into Alhaji Suleiman Bello's legacy. Bello family hosts grand gala for philanthropic endeavors. Zainab's breath caught. This was not just some unknown name. This man was famous. He was powerful. He had a family of his own. She clicked on an image. A press conference. A tall, sharp-eyed man stood at a podium. His suit crisp, his posture strong. Then, she saw it. The sharp nose. The deep-set eyes. The features that looked too familiar. Her heart pounded as she leaned closer to the screen. He looked like her. Aisha peered over her shoulder, eyes widening. Are you sure this isn't some mistake? Zainab didn't answer. She scrolled faster, searching for more, but the more she found, the more her stomach twisted. Why had her parents never mentioned this man? Why had she never questioned anything before? Aisha placed a hand on her shoulder. What if your dad isn't your real dad? The words hit like a slap. Zainab froze. Without another word, she slammed the laptop shut and grabbed her car keys. Where are you going? Aisha called after her. I need to talk to my mother. Now. The mansion loomed ahead, its towering gates opening as she sped through. Her mind raced, her grip tight on the steering wheel. She stormed inside, past startled maids, past the gleaming chandeliers, past the perfectly arranged decor that had never once hinted at a lie. Her mother sat in the grand living room, sipping tea, a picture of calm elegance. Zainab stood before her, breath heavy, phone shaking in her hand. Who is Alhaji Suleiman Bello? A gasp. A shattering sound. The teacup slipped from Madame Hassan's fingers, crashing onto the marble floor. Silence filled the room. The walls of the perfect life Zainab had known began to crack. Madame Hassan's hands trembled as she stared at the shattered teacup. The color drained from her face, her usual poise slipping away. Zainab took a step forward, her voice sharp. Tell me the truth. Madame Hassan's lips parted, but no words came. Tell me, or I'll find him myself. A deep breath. A shaking hand pressing against her chest. And then, a whisper. Chief Hassan is not your father. The world tilted. The air in the grand room grew heavy. Zainab's body stiffened. The words clung to her like thick smoke, suffocating, burning. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, Madame Hassan straightened her shoulders, her voice steadier now, laced with a sorrow that had been buried for too long. I was young. I made a mistake. A mistake. Zainab clenched her fists, rage simmering beneath her skin. Madame Hassan's gaze drifted to the broken teacup, as if searching for the right words. He was already married. A powerful man. I knew I could never be part of his world. Zainab's breath hitched. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. If I told the truth, I would have lost everything. So I did what I had to do. You lied, Zainab spat. For 26 years. Her mother's voice broke. I wanted to take this secret to my grave. Zainab let out a bitter laugh. Well, you failed. The silence stretched between them, thick with betrayal. You don't understand, Madame Hassan whispered. If anyone knew, our lives would have been ruined. Zainab shook her head. So instead, you ruined mine? She turned sharply. Enough. She had heard enough. Behind her, her mother's voice cracked. Zainab, please. But the doors were already closing. She needed to find Alhaji Suleiman Bello. Zainab's hands trembled as she logged into the DNA site. The message box stared back at her, waiting. Her fingers moved before she could stop them. Who are you? Her heart pounded as she hit send. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Her phone buzzed. A message. We need to meet. This changes everything. Her breath caught. She booked a flight to Abuja the next morning. Aisha's voice rang through the speaker as Zainab threw clothes into a suitcase. Z, are you sure about this? If he doesn't want me in his life, he'll tell me to my face. Aisha's sigh crackled through the phone. Be careful. Zainab ended the call. Careful? It was too late for that. She boarded the plane, staring out at the city she had always called home. Nothing would ever be the same again. The golden gates of the mansion stretched high above her, more imposing than anything she had ever seen. The guards barely glanced at her before letting her in, as if they had been expecting her. Her steps echoed on the marble floor as she was led inside. And then he was there. Tall. Commanding. The man whose name had shattered her world. Alhaji Suleiman Bello. His deep-set eyes locked onto hers, unreadable, calculating. Then he spoke. I knew about you, Zainab. Her breath caught. I paid your mother to stay silent years ago. I assumed you would never find out. Zainab's fists clenched. His voice softened. But now that you have, it's time for you to meet the rest of your family. Her stomach twisted. She wasn't sure she wanted this. But it was too late to turn back now. Alhaji Suleiman's voice carried through the grand hall. A family meeting had been called. Zainab's gaze swept over the faces that stared at her. Some curious, some hostile. Then, a voice cut through the room. You are nothing but a mistake. A woman stepped forward, eyes blazing. Aisha Bello, the eldest daughter. You will never be one of us. Zainab's jaw tightened. A sharp gasp came from the far end of the room. Maryam, the youngest wife, sat pale and silent. You mean, you had an affair while you were married to me? Her voice wavered. The tension in the room thickened. Zainab forced herself to stand tall. Another voice sneered from the side. She's here for the inheritance. A brother. Cold. Dismissive. Alhaji Suleiman raised a hand. The room fell silent. Zainab is my daughter, and she will be treated as such. The words settled like a storm waiting to explode. Then, the whispers began. The news spread like fire. And in Lagos, Chief Hassan read the headlines. His face darkened as he slammed the newspaper onto the table. So, all these years, I was raising another man's child. Rage burned in his eyes. This girl is no longer my daughter. The world was about to turn its back on Zainab. And the worst was yet to come. The house was silent. Too silent. Zainab stepped inside, her pulse quickening. Chief Hassan sat in his chair, gripping his cane, his expression carved from stone. Madam Hassan stood beside him, her eyes red, her hands twisting in front of her. Zainab took a breath. Baba, I. His cane slammed against the floor. The sound echoed through the room. I loved you as my own, and this is how you repay me. Zainab's throat tightened. I didn't know. I didn't ask for this. His voice rose. You are not my daughter. Madam Hassan gasped. Hassan, please. His glare silenced her. You deceived me. You both deceived me. Zainab's breath came fast, her hands cold. I raised you. I gave you my name, my blood, my wealth, my respect. And now the whole world is laughing at me. Zainab shook her head. It's not my fault. His fist clenched. Then whose fault is it? Her mother fell to her knees, weeping. We can fix this. Chief Hassan's voice was sharp as a blade. There is nothing to fix. His eyes locked onto the guards. Take them both out of my sight. Madam Hassan sobbed as they were led toward the door. Zainab turned back one last time. Chief Hassan had already looked away. The doors shut. The home she had known all her life was gone. The news spread faster than wildfire. Alhaji Suleiman's enemies had been waiting for a scandal. And now, they had one. Corrupt politician hides secret child for years. A liar and a fraud, can he be trusted? The headlines screamed across television screens and newspapers. Opponents pounced. If he can betray his own family, how can we trust him as a leader? The pressure mounted. The whispers grew louder. And then, Alhaji Suleiman called a press conference. Zainab sat alone, her fingers curled around her phone. She watched the screen, heart pounding. He stood before the cameras, face unreadable. The reporters fired questions. But his voice was calm. Too calm. I have only 3 daughters. I do not know this woman. Zainab's body went still. The reporters exploded. Are the DNA results fake? Is this blackmail? The headlines changed in an instant. Ambitious journalist fakes DNA results to blackmail politician. Zainab's name was dragged through the mud. Her phone buzzed. Her job suspended her. Friends stopped replying. She was completely alone. The nights were the worst. The silence. The emptiness. Then, the feeling that someone was watching. She ignored it at first. But the unease grew. A shadow passed outside her window. She sat up, heart hammering. Then, a loud crash. Her breath caught. The front door swung open. Footsteps rushed inside. A masked man. She leapt from the bed, scrambling backward. Hands grabbed her. She kicked, scratched, screamed. The grip tightened. Her fingers closed around something on the table. A lamp. She swung hard. The man stumbled back. She ran. Into the kitchen. Hands shaking, she grabbed a knife. The man lunged. She slashed blindly. He cursed. She shoved him back, darted for the door. The streets were cold beneath her bare feet. She ran. Heart pounding. Breath short. She didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Who sent them? Chief Hassan's revenge? Alhaji Suleiman's enemies? Or worse, someone in the Bello family? There was nowhere left to run. Zainab disappeared. No phone. No home. She went into hiding. But one thing was clear. She had to fight back. Days passed. Then weeks. Zainab moved like a ghost, careful with every step. Every shadow felt dangerous. Every unfamiliar face made her uneasy. She had lost everything. Her home, her family, her name. But one night, a knock came at the door. Her breath caught. Had they found her? She hesitated, stepping toward the window, peering outside. A familiar face stood on the other side. Aisha Bello. Zainab's pulse quickened. What was she doing here? Aisha stepped inside, arms crossed. You think my father is a good man? Zainab stayed silent. Aisha scoffed. You don't know anything. A thick file hit the table. Zainab frowned. What's this? Proof. Zainab opened the file. Bank transactions. Offshore accounts. Hidden properties. Bribery. Illegal businesses. Mistresses. Every dirty secret Alhaji Suleiman had ever hidden. Zainab's hands trembled. Why are you showing me this? Aisha leaned in. Because I know my father. If you don't destroy him, he will destroy you. Zainab swallowed hard. Use this wisely. And just like that, Aisha turned and walked away. The room was quiet. Too quiet. The file lay open on the table. Zainab stared at it. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was bigger. If she exposed him, it would mean war. If she stayed silent, she would remain powerless. She closed her eyes. She thought of Chief Hassan, the man who raised her. She thought of her mother's betrayal. She thought of the attack. Then she opened her eyes. No more running. No more hiding. No more fear. She gripped the file tightly. I will not let them silence me. She picked up her phone. Dialed a number. An old journalist friend. I have a story for you. A big one. The truth was coming out. Zainab sat alone, staring at nothing. Everything had changed. Her father had disowned her. Her biological father had betrayed her. Her name had been dragged through the mud. But as she sat in silence, she thought of the people who had stood by her. Aisha, the sister who once hated her but had chosen to help. Chief Hassan, the man who raised her, even if he no longer claimed her. The people who had turned against her shared her blood. The people who had helped her did not. Family was not about blood. Family was about loyalty. The truth had cost her everything. Her home, her reputation, her safety. But was she really safe before? Was she really free? She had been living a lie for 26 years. Better to lose everything than to live in deception. She took a deep breath. No more secrets. No more fear. The truth had ruined her life, but it had also set her free. The file of secrets sat in her hands. It held power. It held justice. It held everything Alhaji Suleiman had tried to bury. She gripped it tightly. This was her weapon. Not for revenge. For the truth. For herself. She stepped into the newsroom. Eyes turned to her. Whispers filled the air. She walked past them all, straight to the editor's desk. She placed the file down, meeting his eyes. If the truth ruined my life, then let me use it to ruin theirs. The editor flipped through the documents. Then he nodded. A new story was about to break. And this time, it would change everything. The newsroom buzzed with quiet urgency. The editor's eyes moved swiftly over the pages, absorbing every damning detail. Bribery, embezzlement, hidden mistresses, stolen funds. The corruption of Alhaji Suleiman Bello, laid bare in black and white. He looked up at Zainab, studying her face. "Are you ready for this?" She didn't hesitate. She didn't hesitate. "I've lost everything. I have nothing left to fear." The editor nodded, setting the file aside. "This is going to be big." The story broke within hours. Headlines exploded across every major news platform. The hidden corruption of Alhaji Suleiman Bello, secrets exposed. Illegitimate daughter blows whistle on powerful politician. The internet caught fire. News stations ran endless debates. Supporters of Alhaji Suleiman scrambled to do damage control. His enemies celebrated. His allies turned their backs. The mansion of Alhaji Suleiman Bello was no longer a place of power. It was a fortress under siege. Reporters crowded outside the gates. His security struggled to hold them back. Inside, the air was thick with rage. His wives whispered in panic. His children argued among themselves. Aisha stood in the corner, watching the chaos unfold. She had done her part. And now, she waited. Chief Hassan sat alone in his study, staring at the screen. He read every word of the article. Every accusation. Every truth. And for the first time since Zainab walked out of his house, he felt something stir inside him. Pride. She had faced the storm. She had fought back. And she had won. He exhaled, running a hand over his face. Maybe he had been wrong. Maybe blood didn't define family after all. Zainab walked through the city streets, the weight on her shoulders finally lifting. She had no home to return to. No job waiting for her. But she was free. And freedom was worth everything she had lost. Her name would never be erased. Her story would never be silenced. And for the first time in her life, she knew exactly who she was. Not a secret. Not a mistake. Not a lie. She was Zainab Hassan. And she had rewritten her own fate. Alhaji Suleiman Bello sat in his private study, the curtains drawn, the room heavy with silence. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Calls from his political allies, frantic messages from his legal team, and desperate pleas from his supporters. He didn't answer any of them. The damage had been done. The empire he had built over decades was crumbling around him, piece by piece. He had spent years hiding his sins, paying off the right people, ensuring his reputation remained untouchable. Yet a single truth, unleashed by the daughter he had denied, had brought it all crashing down. The news didn't stop. Corruption cases reopened. Government officials distanced themselves. His opponents called for investigations. And then, the final blow. The FCC launches investigation against Alhaji Suleiman Bello for financial crimes. The Economic and Financial Crimes Commission had stepped in. Warrants were issued. Assets were frozen. It was no longer just a scandal. It was a downfall. At the Hassan residence, the silence was unbearable. Chief Hassan sat in his chair, staring at the television. His wife stood behind him, hesitant, afraid to speak. The daughter they had once cast out had done the impossible. She had faced a monster and won. The world now saw her not as a liar, not as a fraud, but as the journalist who took down one of Nigeria's most powerful men. For the first time in weeks, the shame in Chief Hassan's heart was replaced with something else. Regret. He had raised her. He had loved her. And when she needed him the most, he had abandoned her. He exhaled heavily, rubbing his forehead. Maybe it was time to fix what was broken. Zainab sat in the small apartment she had rented with what little savings she had left. Aisha sat across from her, scrolling through the news on her phone. "It's over," Aisha said, looking up. Zainab shook her head. "No. It's just beginning." Aisha studied her for a moment, then smirked. "You really are my father's daughter." Zainab's lips curled into a small smile, but there was no warmth in it. "No, I am not." And for the first time, she believed it. She was not his daughter. She was not a product of his sins. She was something else entirely. The woman who had set herself free. The trial came months later. Alhaji Suleiman Bello stood before the court, no longer the untouchable man he once was. The evidence was undeniable. The witnesses were many. The crimes were clear. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty. The world watched as the mighty man fell. His supporters turned their backs. His name became a warning, a lesson in greed and arrogance. The same newspapers that once praised him now told the story of his disgrace. But in the end, only one name mattered. Zainab, the daughter who was never meant to exist. The truth that was never meant to be spoken. The storm that no one saw coming. And as she walked away from the courthouse, the cameras flashing, the reporters shouting, she did not run. She did not hide. She had won. And she would never be silent again.